Hello ladies and gentlemen and movie lovers of all kind, and welcome back to the channel. As always, I am your host, Brett Murphy, and for today's video, I have a brand new ranking for you all, as I am going to be ranking all of the MCU Trilogies and Quadrilogies. So Guardians of the Galaxy 3 has finally flown its way into our theaters and the Guardians back into our hearts. It's been 6 years since the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and this one and the recently released Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania has now completed 2 new trilogies in the MCU. So I figured why not take some time to step back and appreciate the full complete arcs that we have already gotten, and look at all of the MCU's trilogies, and we also have 2 quadrilogies, so I figured I should probably throw those in here too. Before I hop into the actual ranking itself, I just wanted to let you all know that I have an entire playlist dedicated to all of my ranking videos, and there are well over 100 videos currently in that playlist, so if rankings are your thing, then be sure to check that out, and I guarantee you'll find something you like. And so without further ado, let's hop right into things. Number 7. The Ant-Man and the Wasp Trilogy. The Ant-Man and the Wasp Trilogy is in a very interesting situation in my own personal opinion. I don't think any of them, including Quantumania, yes, are bad movies. I think they're all just like mid-tier MCU movies, and that's why it ends up in last place. For me personally, I feel like I like the first Ant-Man movie less than most people. I feel like I'm pretty much with the general consensus on Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I feel like I liked Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania more than most people. The first 2 movies suffer from the same issues. I feel like they're a lot of fun, honestly. They have interesting action sequences that put the characters' abilities to good use, and the comedy is well-timed and all feels very natural and never fails to make me chuckle. But both are severely lacking in the villain department, and the stories are nothing special either. Quantumania, on the other hand, fixes the villain problem even if the actor is now in a lot of hot water. The story is still lacking, the laughs were a little more hit or miss, and the visuals were severely lacking, but I had fun with the movie because I felt like it was the MCU doing its best Star Wars impression, and I enjoyed myself. But the trilogy as a whole, looking at the entire story, is severely lacking in any stakes or any emotional weight. They're just kind of light and fluffy filler movies that don't really have any lasting impact at all. So none of them are bad in my opinion, they're all just kind of straight okay across the board. Number 6. The Thor Quadrilogy. See, the Thor movies are also in an interesting situation because I think that the first Thor movie is good. I think that the second one is fine, it's alright, like definitely watchable. It's just dull and bland, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as a lot of people tend to say it is. I think it still has some decent elements in there, in particular the relationship between Loki and Thor and the death of Thor's mother and how that does trickle through and have repercussions. I think the Dark Elves and their lore were actually pretty decent. It's just that the villains came off as really boring. I love Thor Ragnarok because it combined Taika Waititi's sort of trademark offbeat humor, weird, zany, colorful style with some real stakes and some good, solid emotional beats. Plus, Cate Blanchett is like a top 3 to 5 villain in the MCU in my opinion as Hela. We also get to see Thor's turn to being much more of a badass. We also get to see him turn a little bit in the other direction too and become like dumber. There's no way to really sugarcoat that. But I do think that they found a good balance, and it's either this version of Thor or the Infinity War version of Thor that is my favorite. There's just so much to love about Ragnarok, and it is a top 10 MCU movie for me, but I feel like Love and Thunder went in the complete opposite direction, and it took all of that humor and all of that color and all of that over-the-topness and kookiness and weirdness from Love and Thunder, but it left behind all of the stakes, all of the emotion, and all of the darker stuff in favor for just more of that other stuff, and what ended up coming out on the other side was just like a colorful, weird vomit. Like, just all of the comedy was really hit or miss with me. I mean, a lot of it was miss, I'm not gonna lie. And again, coming from someone who loved Ragnarok, but there was just too much, like, the goats got on my nerves. They ruined so many emotional moments. They didn't let a single emotional moment really just sit and have any sort of impact without throwing some stupid joke in there. It's not all bad, though. I think a lot of the action scenes are a ton of fun. I loved Natalie Portman's return and her take on the almighty Thor. She was a badass, had a blast every time she was on screen, and for the most part, I did love Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher. My only issue is that you never get to see the God Butcher butcher any gods. That was so frustrating. Every time he was on screen, the movie skyrocketed. It broke through the ceiling. It was infinitely better every time that Portman or Bale were on screen, but they just don't have enough screen time. And that's where the movie suffers from its issue, so the only reason that this one isn't in last place, despite me thinking that the first two Thor movies are just okay, and the last one is probably my least favorite of the MCU, is just a testament to how much I loved Ragnarok. Number 5, the Iron Man Trilogy. I truly did struggle with the placement of this one, the Iron Man Trilogy, and the one that is going to follow it. Because I think they both have their merits, but also their downfalls. The first Iron Man movie is just brilliant. It is the one that kicked off everything we have today. The entire MCU would not exist if it wasn't for the success of the first Iron Man movie and just how good it is. You look back on that now, and it is just an ode to the olden days, the days that are long gone, simpler times, with just a darker, grittier, and far more grounded superhero movie. I love looking back on the first Iron Man movie. I think it does everything right, including delivering one of the MCU's best villains as Jeff Bridges' take on Obadiah Stane. And sometimes I do miss those days, and that's why it's always fun to harken back to Phase 1 of the MCU, where everything just felt more real and more natural and less out there. Then you get to Iron Man 2, and though I still do have a soft spot for that, I think a lot of it is nostalgia based. I do love Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer, but Mickey Rourke couldn't have possibly phoned it in more. The man mumbles and grumbles through all of his lines. You can barely make out what he's saying through a cheap bullshit Russian accent. It does still have some fun action sequences. I love the last portion with like all of the drones and then Iron Man and War Machine coming together and just blasting them apart and stuff like that, but a lot of it is just lacking that oomph and everything that made the first Iron Man so special. And for a quick turn into some controversy, I personally love Iron Man 3. I really don't have any gripes with it. Sure, some of the humor misses the mark, but for the most part, I think this one delivered on the villains, delivered on the action, delivered on the comedy, and I also always watch it as a Christmas movie, even though there's only like a very small part and light mentions of Christmas here and there. I think it's fun to say that it's a Christmas movie and watch it every Christmas. I never understood everyone hating the Mandarin twist. Like, yeah, that's been tidied up now. I think the MCU is really just pressured into a corner to like make that twist not exist. But nevertheless, I liked the twist. I liked that the Mandarin was just a puppet being controlled by the true puppet master, and that he had far more nefarious things going on behind the scenes with his experiments and stuff. I thought everything tied back together nicely. The performances were great. I loved seeing all of the iron suits and the way that it handles Tony's PTSD. Everything for this movie really did work for me, so I don't see why everyone hates it. But what really drags this one down is Iron Man 2, because love the first Iron Man, love Iron Man 3, they are neck and neck for me. But the second one is just hanging down between these two, like right in the middle, and just dragging them down ever so slightly, which is quite unfortunate, because otherwise this one definitely could have ended up above the next one. And so I guess I should probably now address what the next one is. Number 4. The MCU Spider-Man Trilogy. This one and the Iron Man Trilogy are so close because I prefer both Iron Man and Iron Man 3 to Homecoming and Far From Home, but that's not to say that they're not great movies, because I would probably give both of them like an 8 or 9 out of 10. Like, I still think they are spectacular, but it's No Way Home that elevates the Spider-Man Trilogy and brings it above the Iron Man Trilogy. No Way Home not only is essentially fan service the movie, but hey, I'm a fan that looks to be serviced when I go to see my movies. But I also felt that it tied everything together, especially all of the lessons that Peter had been learning throughout Homecoming and throughout Far From Home, and where the movie ends makes me even more excited for the future of the character, because I feel like everything had come full circle and brought a close, a very satisfying close, to that chapter, and we're now beginning a new chapter, and the future looks very bright for the webhead. So although yes, I do have my gripes with the first two MCU Spider-Man movies, like I feel Homecoming is just a little too small scale, but I love the villain, I love Holland as Spider-Man. Far From Home, I appreciate that they took things out of New York for like the first time ever for Spidey, but I never really believed in the whole like tech that Mysterio uses, but Mysterio loved Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. Some other elements here and there I didn't find were the best, like his villain origin story and things like that, and some other things felt also just a little out of tune and out of sync with what I was hoping for from the movie, and maybe that's just me personally. But No Way Home is really what skyrockets this one up higher than the rest, because that movie is a certified banger. Number 3, the Guardians of the Galaxy Trilogy. Well, I'll be damned, because this race for the final 3 was as tight as it could have possibly gotten. I would probably rank all 3 of these next few as number 1 if I could. I really do feel that these next 3 on the list are essentially, I love them all the same. The first Guardians is a top 10, top tier MCU movie, one of the best comic book movies and superhero movies ever made. Guardians 2 has just continued to grow on me with the passing of time for its beautiful visuals and its touching, deep, emotional character moments that I find are far too often overlooked. And then Guardians 3 is now my favorite Guardians movie. It not only delivered everything I was hoping for, but exceeded every single one of my expectations, taking everything I loved about the first Guardians, like the spectacle and the action and the better comedy, I think, than its sequel, with the character moments and the visuals, mashed it all together, took out all the stuff that sucked, like the weak villain of the first movie, because Quadrilogy gave us one of the best MCU villains to date. I'd say this guy is definitely cracking the top 10 for MCU villains, if not potentially the top 5. He is menacing, he is cruel, and this man gave it his all in this performance. But this was also an immaculately satisfying conclusion to an amazing trilogy. Like, if this is the last we see of these Guardians, I will leave satisfied with where their character arcs ended off. It is touching, it is beautifully written, it is dark, it is funny, and above all else, it is full of heart. Which is really what you can say about this entire trilogy. The whole trilogy is just about family, and it is about love. And I don't think that's emphasized any better than in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and where that movie ends off is just truly some of the best comic book movie writing I have ever had the pleasure of viewing. I simply loved it, and I think all it does is just further elevate the first two Guardians movies, giving us an overall superb trilogy. And let's not forget that these 3 contain some of the best soundtracks in movie history. Each individual movie has its own set of tunes that stole our hearts and expanded our horizons with songs that have stuck in our brains for years. James Gunn most certainly knows how to pick the right tracks. Number 2, the Captain America Trilogy. Like I said, these top 3 were all tied for me, and the only reason this one gets edged ever so slightly above, because I do have to rank them, is because I would place Winter Soldier and Civil War ever so slightly above any of the Guardians movies. I think that Guardians 1, Guardians 3, Civil War, and Winter Soldier are all like 10 out of 10 movies. So it's just little personal preferences here and there that makes me have to put one above the other. But I also have a major soft spot for the first Captain America movie that a lot of people don't. I love war movies, and I also love that this movie embraced the campiness and the goofiness and the fun of comic books, while also having some very dark shit and some very hard-hitting good moments, some high stakes, and it was the final last missing piece of the puzzle before the first Avengers movie. Winter Soldier is understandably many of people's favorite MCU movies, and for the longest time, Civil War was my favorite MCU movie. I'm talking like 3 or 4 years. Civil War was my all-time favorite MCU movie, and now it's just comfortably sitting in that runner-up spot. That's how much I love Civil War. It just went into those areas, the nitty-gritty of what it's like to be a civilian in this universe that almost none of the other movies ever really touch on, especially not to these depths and go to these lengths to really show us everything that goes on outside of the world of our heroes themselves. I like the way that the teams are split, I like that the story also stays very personal, and I love the way that things left off and led into Infinity War and Endgame. That's why I'm going to give the Captain America trilogy the runner-up spot. Number 1, the Avengers Quadrilogy. Hot take coming in, but I don't think there's a single weak link in the Avengers Quadrilogy at all. A lot of people like to bag on Age of Ultron, but Age of Ultron is still a 10 out of 10 movie for me. I never understood why so many people hated on this movie. I think James Spader is one of the best MCU villains we have ever gotten. I think that the movie perfectly caps off a lot of what was built up through Phase 2 after the events of the first movie, but also sets up for Phase 3 like Captain America Civil War and the next couple Avengers movies that came shortly thereafter. And it delivered on everything I was hoping that it would, so I truly never saw any issues with Age of Ultron, and I'll never understand why so many people take so much issue with this movie. That being said, the first Avengers movie is a top 3 theater-going experience of all time for me. I will never forget seeing that opening night with my friends. Infinity War is one of my favorite movies of all time, and Endgame is a top 5 favorite movie of all time for me. So without having a single weak link and all 4 movies across the board being a 10 out of 10, I don't know how I couldn't have put this one in first place. The only reason that I do say that it was tied with the last 2 entries is because the story isn't done. We know we have 2 more Avengers movies on the way, and we really don't know how they're going to play out and lend to these stories that we already have from the Avengers. But from the beginning of the first Avengers, when our heroes first meet one another, to the end of Endgame, can you name a more satisfying, full circle story? Probably not. And that's why, for me, I had to put it in first place. So that is all for today's video, folks. Be sure to let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with my ranking. While you're at it, don't forget to let me know how you would have ranked all of the MCU trilogies and quadrilogies. If you're a movie lover whatsoever, then my channel is the place to be for you. Be it rankings like this one, top 10 videos, tier videos, versus videos, I have it all and so much more, with plenty of new stuff coming to the channel each and every single week, and we are closing in on 800 videos currently on the channel for you to enjoy. So if you enjoyed this particular video, then be sure to hit that thumbs up button, and if any of that sounds like it's right for you and you want to see more from me, then smash that subscribe button right now. While you're at it, don't forget to ring that little bell icon, that way you can be notified about all of my latest uploads. And as always, stay safe, thank you so much for watching, and that's a wrap. Hey you, yeah you, if you made it this far, just know I appreciate you, and while you're here, consider hitting that subscribe button.